I am pleased to have an opportunity to introduce Dr. Rajesh Sharma. He is currently professor and head Department of English, Punjabi University, Patiala. He has more than 35-year experience in teaching at higher education level. This includes literature, language, criticism, theory, film studies, creative writing, and translation studies. His work has appeared in Brevity, Film Philosophy, World Literature Today, Chandrabhaga, Biblio, The Book Review, Economic and Political Weekly, Mainstream, and The Wire. In addition to various reputed academic journals and newspapers, he has co-edited South Asian Ensemble, a Canadian Indian Journal of Literature, Arts and Culture for 10 years. He writes in English and Punjabi and translates between Punjabi and English and from Hindi to English. His forthcoming book is Rereading Aristotle's Poetics. Now I invite Dr. Rajesh Sharma to deliver the lecture on topic translation theory and practice.
Good morning and welcome everybody. The topic I have chosen to speak on is the space of translation and Indian view. Well, the first question that arises when we consider translation as Indians is it really possible to speak of an Indian view? The way we remember the discourse about translation, that memory comes infected with the experience of colonization. So what translation means? Generally we think in terms of what Goethe said about translation or what, say, the European and British translators of Indian texts or of other texts into Indian languages did. So the question before me is, can we speak about an Indian view of translation? And secondly, has there really been a tradition of translation in India? Is it possible to fully separate adaptation and translation? How far are the various versions of Ramayana and Mahabharata translations? Sometimes translations within the same language. And can they be called translations? Then if translation means carrying from one language to another a text, does it not imply that there are very clear separating walls between languages? Whereas, is it not the fact that several languages do not have closed boundaries but are porous to each other? Because the words are shared, the rhythms are shared, the syntactical structures are shared, all right? So, is translation really the concept that sometimes it appears to us to be? So we begin with these questions before us. Now, what does art mean? Art, it is usually agreed, and among those who agree is the great thinker Aristotle. Art is the bringing into the world of something that did not exist before. You can say it is bringing into the world of something beautiful that did not exist before. But beautiful is an adjective that has subjective and cultural specific connotations. So if we drop the word beauty for the time being or beautiful for the time being, and think about aesthetics. I think that would do. So, if art is bringing into the world something that did not exist until now, is translation also an art? How far does translation bring into the world something that did not exist before? Can we say that a translated work of literature is simply another work with a different, the same work with a different body? If we do so, are we affirming our belief in the transmigration of souls? Right? That the essence of a text, the spirit of a text transmigrates from language to language, changing bodies, getting a reincarnation. But if it is a reincarnation, if translation is a reincarnation, how much is it like the reincarnation we assume the living creatures to pass through? How much do we remember of our past births, past lives, if we are reincarnated? Okay, so one thing we need to do is examine the lurking metaphysics in the way we conceptualize translation. Okay, so when people say, well, this is a bad translation or this is a good translation because the writer has used his freedom of imagination in translating, I don't think it is a very valid objection. If a translation is a perversion, then yes, we can say it is objectionable entirely. But translators also have a certain freedom. And that freedom is grounded in the difference and the relation between the languages within which translation happens. Now, you know, Walter Benjamin was right to say that a translation that follows verbatim a given text is a bad translation. And he said translation only begins when you take off from the given text. When you take off from the given text, that is, you begin to soar like a bird. Why? And he had a certain structure of argument behind it. When he said this, he meant that the language into which you carry a work should be able to unfold, unravel the possibilities in that work which the first language, the language of writing it, did not allow. It's like when you change your dress, to use the same metaphor, you begin to look a different person to some extent. When you put a work in another language, the work, its spirit, and its body cannot be really distinguished. Right? That means, if that is the case, should we not ask what is the highest purpose of translation? And Benjamin's answer was that a translator must foreignize. That is, you translate between two languages, and both languages are impregnated with the seed of the other. That is how languages are rejuvenated. Otherwise, all languages are dead. So the phonetics of language will say, no, 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 keep it as it is. Somebody like Benjamin, who had seen fascism from close quarters and suffered its havoc, he knew the value of freedom, even of the translator's freedom, and the freedom that is inherent in the traffic between languages. Okay? So with these words, I begin now talking about what I understand by translation from the Indian point of view. You see, translation has been described as the second original. As the second original. This is almost a paradox. How can an original be second? But only a translation can tell you how it is a second original. You know, Cezanne once painted somebody's painting. And Cézanne's painting of the same painting is a very different painting. Why? Because an artist has a different vision. So he saw the same things through the painting of another from his own vision. And the result was a painting reconstructed but recreated. Right? A translation is like this when it comes to literature, because literature is not there just as a bag of data. It is much more. Then I recall the great Russian writer Nabokov, who in one essay on style says that no objective words exist to describe any objective reality. And then he says, neither of the two exists. There are neither objective words nor objective worlds. He says every artist knows this, every writer knows this. Because the subjective and the objective, in at least our case, in human case, cannot be entirely distinguished, because we cannot, howsoever hard we may try, shed our skin, our memory, our consciousness, our identity, our experiences, our dreams. We remain we. And the world as it appears to me, even a chocolate as it appears to me, the way I taste is not the same as everybody else does or somebody else does. Right? And this problematizes the very idea of translation as something that carries a work from the body of a language to the body of another language. Okay? Now, this idea where the point of view and the object on which the point of view is cast, this idea that the two are inseparable in the Indian tradition of philosophy has been known as Drishti Srishtivad. Drishti Srishtivad. That is, the world is created by the vision of the person who sees the world. Not that the world doesn't exist, no. The world as it exists for me exists only for me. Hence, translations of the same work vary. Because the same work is seen by different readers differently. And translation comes out of reading. Okay? Now, the question is anuvad the right word for translation? If you go to Indian tradition, you have the words like anukriti, anukar, anukaran. Translation is a spatial term. You put something across into another text, into another medium. It's a spatial imagination at work in the word translation. Anukar, anukriti, anukaran are temporal terms. Their determining dimension is time. So translation as anukar is what follows, what comes after, what follows after, what takes after. And when I say takes after, it means like a boy or girl takes after their parent. Translation is what takes after the given text, right? What follows and takes after. So since it follows, its temporality has to be different. Right? Its temporality has to be different. That is, when I am translating a text of, say, 3000 years ago, obviously I will not be rendering it in that time. The time also intervenes. And I can see that in the preceding lecture, this was being talked about. The place, the time, the reader, the writer, the translator. Right? So you can see Drishti Srishtivad is always operational whether we recognize it or not. But if we do, it makes things clear for us. Not easier, but clearer. All right. Now, Anukriti has this word kriti, anukar, anukaran. In each, there is this resonance of work. Translation is work. It is a craft. It is an art. It needs abhyas. It needs practice. It needs doing. And another word that comes to mind, let me just mention a few of those. If you look at the words in Amar Singh's Amar Kosh, probably the world's first thesaurus, and it is in Sanskrit. These are some of the words it gives for an image. Pratiman, the closest word in English to that is model. Pratibimb, reflection. Pratima, image. Then pratinidhi, representation. And a very interesting term is pratikriti. Now you can see anukaran, anukriti, pratikriti. If you combine the two, pratikriti and anukriti, you have a better idea of what literary translation is. Pratikriti is a parallel work, a work that stands face to face with the work against which it has found its existence. Anukriti is that which follows. So a translation is that which follows in order to be able to stand parallel to the so-called first original. Right. Now, this rescues from the shadows the vocation of the translator. The translator is not a person who does second-hand jobs. No. Those who think they do the second-hand jobs also have a very poor view of writing. Writing for them is something that any scribe in a court can do, right? Any scribe attached to a lawyer. But those who write know what it means to write, right? So, translation as pratikriti and anukriti. If we now relate this to a beautiful concept from Indian philosophical and aesthetic tradition, we will see what the implications can be. And that concept is vikalpa. Vikalp is alternative, but vikalp is what the mind creates when it wanders. So in Yoga Sutras, Patanjali talks about the mind being pulled back from its entanglement in vikalps. That is, the mind creates its own worlds. As a result, you are pushed off your pursuit of truth. Truth in inverted quotes. Because these days, truth is a concept that is easily assaulted. Well, what the translator does is he creates another work. He creates a vikalp. And vikalp now is based in the word kalp, kalpana. And you know, kalpana is not fantasy, it is not fancy, it is not imagination as it is understood by persons who think, well, it is a kind of secondary, minor, unreal activity. No. Kalpana etymologically is also construction, making, forging, building. That means Kalpana as imagination in the Indian tradition is the faculty with which you build an alternative mode of existence, an alternative reality, an alternative truth. Think now of that great work, Wide Sargasso Sea, of Jean Rhys. As a little girl of 13, she one day dreams of the lost past of that mad woman in the attic of Bronte, right, in Jane Eyre. And she says, If I ever write a book, I will write the story of this woman who has been consigned to the darkness of the attic by her husband, who has brought another woman into his life. And years later, I think she was in her 70s, when she was rediscovered by a BBC journalist. People had thought she had died. She was rediscovered and she wrote this book, White Sargasso. The story of that woman. Now she imagined that woman, her life, and she created this great novel. From where did it come? It was a vehicle that was born out of the novel of Emily Bronte. Right? A vehicle is this. It's a building, it's a construction, it's a making. It's not simply a copy as a shadow, but for the copy as a shadow, you have two words in Indian tradition. One is abhas, one is chaya. The two words can be very useful when we study cinema, theoretically. Abhas. Abhas is something that makes you feel that an object is like something else, or an object is something. So it is a kind of sense of the presence of something that may not be fully there. And chaya, obviously, chaya is of something that stops the passage of light, either fully or partially. And so, can translation be called a chaya? Is it the shadow a work casts in another language? If you try to capture the original by reading a translation, you are looking at the translation as giving you the abhas of the original. Right? So, this brings us to a central concept in the Shaivagam, in that whole body of works, of texts, of practices, of personalities, of schools of thinking, that we associate primarily, in my case, with Shaivism of the Kashmir Valley. Now, Abhinav Gupta developed this concept to its, I think, finest potential. What is the status of reality? This world that you see, that you are part of. He said, think of an image in a mirror. There is a town, and the town is reflected in a mirror. But here, there is a town as an objective reality, and there is the town as a reflection. Now, switch and imagine a town in a mirror without a town of which it is a reflection. He says this is the status of what we call reality. This is a beautiful poetic concept also. It's not just philosophical, but it's a beautiful aesthetic idea. Think that what you say is reality is for the maker of this reality nothing but a reflection in the mirror of consciousness. Okay? Now, as Anukar, translation is a reflection of a reflection. If literature in translation is the reflection of what is already a reflection, can we say that the second reflection is of inferior worth because it is not the first reflection? After reflection is a reflection. You put two mirrors against each other and place an object in the center, and then there are uncountable objects appearing through infinite regression between the two mirrors. Which reflection is superior? None. Right? So Abhinav Gupta's idea of reality as a pratibimb, without there being a bimb, gives you the idea of the self-referentiality of a literary text and of the translation of a literary text. Now, an extremely interesting thing is the relationship between the two concepts of bimb and pratibimba. When I stand before a mirror, I am a bimb. What I see in the mirror is my pratibimba. When I don't stand before a mirror and I am not seeing my pratibimba, I am not a bimb, then I am myself. What does it mean? Many of you have read Derrida. You would recall his problematization of the binary oppositions. So what do we find here? What we find is that the primacy of the bimb is deconstructed. The bimb is the bimb because it has a pratibimb. So it is the pratibimb that makes a bimb a bimb. That means the so-called originary object does not have a creative precedence in terms of the order of worth. No. Because a tree, when painted, becomes that painted tree only thanks to the painting. Otherwise, just a tree. All right. So if in translation, you create another image of what is already an image, you are creating obviously another pratibimb, a second original, but that second original that is not second and hence inferior, but equally self-referential and autonomous. Now, among the things that we should consider in translation, beyond the idea of the image, is the sound. You see, Rajshekhar, writing in the 10th century AD, gave great importance to Kaku Shastra. It is the discipline that teaches you the value of sounds. To a great extent, literature is sound and is a story and sound. To a great extent. Great prose is great prose because it is, they say, like poetry. But it is not poetry. There is no great writing without musicality. So whether it is Rajshekhar writing in the 10th century AD or Flaubert writing in the 19th century France or Pushkin, the great Russian writer and pioneer, for all of them, the final test of writing is what your ear tells you. If your ear says fine, then it is fine. So Flaubert used to do this. He would write a sentence and then ask himself, does it sound well? And then he would ask people during his evening walk. I'll read a sentence to you. Tell me, how does it sound? And unless it sounded fine to his ear, it was not fine. Right? So this is something you get in the Indian tradition of the arts. Then dhwani. If you look at what Saussure says about the making of the sign, right, from which then signifier and signified would be carved out. And based on that, Roland Barthes talks about as the rustle of language. Okay. And there's another, what's his name? He talks about all language as a carving out from an infinite murmur of language. So the moment you begin to make meaningful noises, that is, the moment you begin to make understandable sounds, you begin to make words, you are carving out a system of sounds from a rustle of language. And what is not carved into shape remains noise. So what is dhwani? Dhwani is suggestiveness of language. Dhwani is suggestiveness because a great poet is able to tap the potential noise around language, around a word, around a sound of a word, and fill it with refreshing suggestions. That is dhwani. Now, a good translation, is also in reading extremely musical. It doesn't compromise harmonics. And you can see the idea is there very much in Kaku and in Dhwani. And then we move to the next concept, that is Abhinay. Abhinay is acting, it's a performance. Aristotle in the Poetics speaks of a poet learning to write a play, construct a character and a plot. He says the best thing is you visualize. You be the character you want to create. You feel you are him, her. You speak like him, her, move like him, her. What happens? Authenticity enters the play. This is a tip he is giving to the aspiring playwright. This is called gesture in the language of the great Russian poet and theorist of poetry, Nikolai Gumilev. Gumilev was the husband of Anna Akhmatova. What is gesture? His gesture is when the reader, reading a work, feels the work mobilizing his body, so that the body begins to behave like various characters. Now, from ear, we have expanded to the entire body, the involvement of the whole body. And all of you who enjoy reading literature, who enjoyed reading literature and as children, would bear me out that great reading carries you in its current. You sing with it, you weep with it, you participate in the inner lives of characters and their outer existence. You become Lear when you read Lear. Think of John Keats paying the greatest tribute to Shakespeare as a poet, when he said, if a person sees King Lear being performed for 3-5 nights consecutively, he'll go mad. He says, I can't imagine what Shakespeare must have suffered when he created King Lear, because Shakespeare must have become King Lear before he created King Lear. Now that is gesture. That is what we have in Abhinay. Okay? And this is what makes both writing and translation performative arts. All creative writing, is performative. It has to be acted out in the imagination or actually in reality. As teachers, you frequently experience this. Reading something, you become an actor. Because short of that, you think you are not being able to penetrate the reality of a work. And the same must happen for the translator also, if the translation is to take off. All right? Now, what is that ability that makes us read something critically and intelligently? Because criticism and intelligence are not necessarily, yoked. Criticism can be very unintelligent also. It can be, in fact, Raj Shekhar talks about critics who thrive on eating grass. So they are donkeys. That is what he suggested. There are those who write out of jealousy. They will always attack a work of literature because they feel, well, why couldn't I do this? But the real critic, he says, is one who is tattva abhiniveshi, one who can pierce into the deepest secret of the work. That is, one whose criticism arises as a response to that work created by them. He doesn't impose his ideas on the work. He enables the work to speak to him. And his criticism finds its language in the language of the work that is being read. Right? He is Tattva Abhiniveshi, one who does not let go of the Tattva, the itness, the thatness of the work of literature. All right. Now, Pratibha is that what we in English sometimes call native intelligence. Pratibha. What is Pratibha? It is not just talent. There's a whole idea behind the term Pratibha. It's Pratiabha. Pratiabha. It is the light that shines in response to a work of literature and enables you to access its beauty, its power, its mysteries. That is your Pratibha. As a reader, as a critic, as a translator. And how does it happen? It creates in you an abhas of entering the reality of a work which is actually only of imagination. And think of Abha. Abha is a sort of halo. Abha is the luminous circle. Abha is light. Abha is radiance. Abhas is therefore not just an illusion, no. It is a creation of light. And there are three parts which constitute our ability to read. And if we can't read appropriately, if we can't read by penetrating the secrets of a work, we are bad readers and we definitely cannot be acceptable translators. Forget about being critics. But what are those three things? Those three things in the Indian tradition are called Mati, Pragya, and Smriti. Smriti, is memory. A lot we bring from our readings, our experiences. Memory alone is not enough. Mati is that part of our intelligence which deals with the here and now, with the present. So Smriti deals with the past. Mati, with what is now, here. And Pragya, that which anticipates as if intuitively what cannot be seen but which can be glimpsed through in the light of an illumined mind. Right? So as a reader, we actually exercise all the three together. We use memory, we use presence of mind, we use intuition and foresight. You have an idea where the work is going. All right? So I will now come towards the end, not exactly the end, but towards the end, and that is a lovely idea taken from Yogini Hridaya. Yogini Hridaya is an ancient tantric text. Parts of it have been translated by the people who composed Kala Tattva Kosh, one of its volumes. And I've taken this from Kala Tattva Kosh, published by Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. And it is this. There is this word, Jagat Chitra. Jagat Chitra, the world as a work of art, the world as a painting. Imagine what the poet, philosopher, practitioner of Tantra says. The world is a painting, painted by the great painter, that is Lord Shiva. It's Paramashiva. Let's say the world is a creation of the status of a painting painted by God, by the Creator, who wipes it and paints it again. If the world is a painting, imagine, the world is a work of art. And what is a work of art? And why does God create this painting called the world? Now, at the heart of Shaivagam is the idea that God is not doing it out of any obligation. It is unlike that idea of the need to give you grace and to redeem you. No, no, no. The world is created because the Creator finds pleasure in creating it. That pleasure doesn't have any purpose. It exists for itself. So it is in the sheer freedom, in the swatantra of creation that the world is created. So here is the most essential, even politically most essential doctrine of the making of art and the act of translation and of adaptation. That is, if God creates the world for the sake of creating it, why does the artist create art for the sake of creating it? Why does the translator create a translation for the sake of creating it? That means, like the world, the work of art, and like the work of art, the translation of a work of art is an affirmation of freedom. So, like a work of art, a work of translation also should not ideally be subservient to anything. It has to exist in its own right. All right? So, the world as a work of art and the work of art as a world is an affirmation of the freedom of the creator of the work and the translator as a creator. All right? So that is what I had to say. I'm sorry I had to rush a bit because I wanted to see in case you have any queries. After taking your queries at about 12, I'll have to do. Yes, thank you so much.